On a quiet country road, Rachel Carter was driving home from her late-night shift at the local coffee shop when she suddenly saw flashing red and blue lights in her mirror. She had just left work early to avoid rush-hour traffic, but the police were still on high alert for suspicious vehicles. Rachel's heart raced as she pulled over, expecting a routine check, but instead of issuing a ticket, Sergeant Kyle Morris was waiting to turn the stop into a violent assault. The reason for his aggressive approach: he had received an anonymous tip about Rachel, claiming that she was part of a radical left-wing group with ties to anti-police activism. Morris's reputation as a racist cop made him notorious in town and earned him numerous citations over the years. But this time, he seemed intent on making a name for himself by targeting someone who dared to speak against his authority. As Rachel watched, she noticed that Morris' body language was aggressive and unsettling, not just towards her, but also towards other drivers. As he approached Rachel's vehicle with an unyielding stance, she could sense the tension building in the air between them. The cop had a menacing demeanor, his eyes fixed on her every move as if ready to strike at any moment. Rachel tried to remain calm and assess the situation, knowing that this was no ordinary traffic stop. /M__1 Rachel's father, Daniel Carter, who retired from the U.S. Army Special Forces after serving 25 years of service in Afghanistan, had always been a man of honor and integrity. As Rachel grew older, he became increasingly aware of his daughter's political activism, particularly her criticism of police misconduct online. Daniel was known for his unwavering support for social justice causes and believed that the government was too often overreacting to minor cases like this one. He had spent years speaking out against corruption in law enforcement and feared that Rachel's bold stance would put him at odds with those who sought power and control. As Morris approached, Daniel instinctively took action to protect his daughter from harm. His military training kicked into gear as he drew up a defensive position, positioning himself between her vehicle and the cop while keeping an eye on the road ahead. /M_0_2 The officer's aggressive tactics only served to escalate tensions, causing Rachel to feel overwhelmed by fear and anxiety. She tried to keep her composure under control, but she could see that Morris was determined to win this argument at any cost. As they exchanged heated words, a sense of danger grew within the cabin as the cop launched his attack with a well-placed kick to Daniel's kneecap. The force sent Rachel flying across the road and landed hard against a nearby tree, causing her to lose control and veer off course. /M_0_3 The impact was devastating, sending Rachel tumbling into the water, unconscious from head to toe. Moments later, she woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by emergency personnel who were performing CPR on her. Despite being critically injured, Rachel remained conscious and knew that something had happened during the traffic stop. She tried to recall what had happened, but with each passing moment, memories began to fade away, leaving only fragments of confusion and fear. /M_0_4 As news spread about the officer's attack on Rachel, rumors and speculations emerged about who might be behind it. Some speculated that the cop was an anti-police extremist or had personal grudges against Rachel due to her activism, while others believed that he had been hired by a powerful figure seeking to silence anyone who dared to speak out. As Daniel sat in his hospital room, he couldn't shake off the feeling of dread and anger. He knew that their daughter's life was in danger, but how could this have happened? How could someone so respected and admired be taken from him? /M_0_5 days turned into weeks as Rachel recovered at the hospital, her injuries slowly healing. Daniel struggled to come to terms with his grief and anger, knowing that justice had been served in a way he never thought possible. As he continued to investigate Morris' past, he uncovered evidence of police misconduct throughout the region, including instances where officers targeted individuals who spoke out against them or participated in political protests. These stories only fueled Daniel's determination to bring down the corrupt system and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. /M_0_6. With every revelation about Morris' past came a renewed sense of purpose within him. He knew that justice could not be served by just one person, but it was up to all of us to stand together against corruption and fight for what is right. As the years went by, Daniel continued to work tirelessly on his investigation, gathering evidence and speaking out against those who sought power at any cost. His daughter's memory remained a constant reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can still shine through. /M_0_7. 7 years after Rachel's death, her father's legacy lived on as an inspiration for many others to stand up for what they believe is right and fight against injustice. Daniel continued his quest for truth and justice, using every ounce of his strength and resilience to bring down the corrupt system that had taken his daughter from him. /M_0_8. As Rachel's story faded into memory, her father's legacy remained a shining beacon of hope in a world filled with darkness. He knew that even in the face of adversity, the truth can still triumph and lead to progress towards a better future for all. In the quiet country road, Rachel Carter sat staring blankly at the bureau as she waited for a chance to call 911. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the rolling hills and shimmering trees that surrounded her. She had been pulled over by a white police officer named David, who claimed he had reason enough to suspect her of driving recklessly. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she listened intently to his voiceover, trying to maintain composure in this unfamiliar situation. David was tall and muscular, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to pierce through her soul. He held a clipboard, his fingers clicking rhythmically against the wood as he spoke about a traffic violation and possible drug use. Rachel's heart raced even faster when David announced their planned interview for later that night at the town hall. Rachel tried to keep herself calm, but her mind was racing with fear and confusion. She had never driven so recklessly before, despite feeling perfectly fine on the road. Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse to retrieve a driver's license and insurance card. David scrutinized her every move, his eyes locking onto her face for any sign of deception. As Rachel began to speak, David leaned in closer, his voice deepening with authority. "You're under arrest on suspicion of driving without proper registration," he said, gripping her arm tightly. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she tried to compose herself before continuing. "I'm not guilty of anything," Rachel responded firmly, trying to maintain a level head despite the fear and anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. "I understand why you're investigating me now, but I assure you, this is an accident." David hesitated for a moment, his expression unreadable as he processed what Rachel was saying. Finally, he released her hand and stepped back, taking in the seriousness of the situation before him. "Listen up," David said, addressing all those gathered at the town hall that night. "I know you're wondering why I'm here today to talk with you about your daughter's death. Her name is Rachel Carter, and she was just 18 when she died last year while driving on a country road in our county. We were shocked and devastated by her passing and knew immediately we had to investigate the circumstances surrounding it." Rachel watched as David began to speak, his voice cracking with emotion as he shared details about their family's journey following Rachel's death. He explained how they struggled to come to terms with what happened, feeling like they had lost a piece of themselves when she was taken away from them. David then turned to the community and asked for anyone who may have witnessed or heard anything suspicious regarding Rachel's behavior that day. The crowd listened intently as David outlined their concerns about her reckless driving habits and drug use, emphasizing the importance of reporting such incidents immediately if they were observed. As the interview continued, Rachel struggled with the emotions she was feeling. She had always known that her daughter would have wanted to be a police officer someday, but seeing the fear in her own eyes made her wonder how much more difficult it must have been for her to make that decision at such a young age. David's final statement touched Rachel deeply, reminding her of the impact that Rachel's death could have on their family and the community. He spoke about the ripple effect that would continue for generations to come, as people would be reminded of what had happened to another innocent person just like Rachel. "We know how much you loved your daughter," David said, tears streaming down his face. "But we also need to acknowledge the consequences her death has on others in our community. It's important that everyone takes responsibility for their actions and makes an effort to prevent similar tragedies from happening again." Rachel listened intently as David continued, feeling a sense of hope wash over her despite the overwhelming fear and sadness she was experiencing. She knew that even though Rachel had been taken away from them too soon, her legacy would live on through the hearts of those who loved her and fought for justice. As David left the town hall that night, Rachel took stock of what she had learned about the situation and made a decision to take action against the corrupt system in their county. She contacted local law enforcement agencies and began working with them to gather evidence and support for her investigation. The days and weeks following Rachel's death were filled with chaos and confusion as authorities worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery surrounding her mysterious death. However, as they pieced together a clear picture of what had occurred, Rachel knew that justice was on their side. David returned to town hall months later, presenting his findings to the public in an open meeting attended by community members and law enforcement officials alike. The evidence presented during the hearing shed light on how corruption had infiltrated their county's criminal justice system, leading to a culture of cover-ups and deception that took Rachel's life away. David outlined several key reforms that he called for, including increased transparency in police investigations, stronger penalties for drug use by law enforcement officials, and better training for officers to recognize and report suspicious behavior. He also emphasized the importance of community involvement in criminal justice systems, advocating for more partnerships between local agencies and community organizations to address issues such as poverty, domestic violence, and mental health. The reforms received widespread support from the community and were met with enthusiasm by law enforcement officials who recognized the need for change. They worked together to implement these changes, implementing new policies and procedures aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future. Rachel's story became a symbol of hope and resilience in their county, serving as an inspiration for countless others to stand up against corruption and fight for what is right. Her legacy lived on long after her death, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of light that can shine through and lead us towards progress and justice. As David left town hall once again, Rachel felt grateful for the opportunity to share her daughter's story with others. She knew that her daughter would have been proud of what she had accomplished and would continue fighting for justice long after she was gone. In conclusion, Rachel Carter's tragic death became a turning point in their county's criminal justice system, leading to increased transparency, stronger penalties, and better training for law enforcement officials. Her story served as an inspiration for countless others to stand up against corruption and fight for what is right, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, hope can still triumph and lead towards progress towards a better future for all. Int. Lethal City Hall. David, the retired detective, sat in a small conference room with his team of law enforcement officials. They were discussing recent cases that had been assigned to them and the progress they had made so far. As he looked around at the faces of their colleagues, he couldn't help but feel frustrated by the lack of change. "I know we've taken some bold steps," David said, looking up from his notes. "But it's clear that racism still exists in our county's criminal justice system. The incidents we're seeing are more prevalent than ever before, and they're putting innocent people at risk." One of the officers sitting next to him, Detective Jack Williams, nodded thoughtfully. "I agree," he said. "We need to do better, David. We can't continue ignoring these issues." David's eyes flicked across the room as a dark-haired woman sat in the back row with her hands on her knees. She was an elderly woman named Rachel Carter, and she had been stopped by a racist cop several weeks ago. Rachel looked tired but determined as she walked into the conference room. Her daughter, Sarah, stood behind her, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe what's happening to us," Rachel said through gritted teeth. "My son was pulled over for no reason and ended up dead on the side of the road." Detective Williams took a deep breath before continuing his speech. "We need to examine this case from every angle, David. We have to identify who is responsible for these incidents and hold them accountable." David nodded in agreement as he scribbled notes down. He knew that Rachel's story was far-reaching, affecting not only her family, but also the wider community. Rachel had always been a strong advocate for justice, David said. She believed that everyone should be treated equally under the law, regardless of their race or social status. She worked tirelessly to raise awareness about these issues and encouraged others to stand up against injustice. As he spoke, Detective Williams took out his laptop and opened it to Rachel's police report from weeks ago. "I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for," he said, holding up the document. "But I've reviewed your case file, and there are a few key points that stand out." David furrowed his brow as Detective Williams began to explain how Rachel had been pulled over on a quiet country road in their county's outskirts. "The officer who stopped us was aggressive and unprofessional," David said. "He seemed like he thought he could intimidate her into giving up the information she needed to solve our case." Detective Williams continued, explaining that Rachel had tried to explain herself and provide as much evidence as possible, but the cop remained unconvinced. "Her voice got raised when he asked if she was black," David said. "He immediately assumed she was and started calling her names and making racial slurs based on those assumptions." Rachel's face twisted into a scowl as Detective Williams continued to speak. He then ordered her out of the vehicle, grabbed her by the arm, and threw her against the side of the road before running away, David said. "My daughter was terrified. She knew that if she had provided more information or refused to give up her driver's license, he would have stopped her." David sighed as he thought about what Rachel had gone through. He knew that this incident was just one of many instances where racism and discrimination were taking place in their county. "It's not a matter of whether we can solve these cases," David said. "It's about how we respond to them when they do occur. We need to be more vigilant, more proactive, and willing to take action against those who perpetuate systemic inequalities." As he finished his speech, Detective Williams looked around the room at his colleagues. "We cannot continue down this path without addressing these issues," he said. "We can't allow racism and discrimination to define our justice system. We need to work together to create a safer community for everyone, regardless of their race or background." David nodded in agreement as he closed his laptop and looked out the window at the bustling city below. "Rachel's story is not just about her daughter," he said. "It's about hope, resilience, and the power of standing up against injustice. Her legacy lives on long after she was gone, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, There is always a glimmer of light that can shine through and lead us towards progress and justice. With those words echoing in his mind, David stood up from the conference room and made a commitment to their team. "We will continue Rachel's legacy by addressing these issues head-on," he said. "We will work together to create a safer community for everyone, regardless of race or background. We won't let racism define our justice system. We'll build it instead." David stood up from his seat and made his way out of the conference room, determined to make a difference in their county's criminal justice system and inspire others to do the same. Global outline. Rachel Carter is a white, middle-class mother of two girls who lives in rural Virginia. One day, while driving down a quiet country road with her daughter on the back seat, she receives an unexpected stop by a racist police officer. The cop stops at their car without asking for any reason and assumes that they're breaking traffic laws or engaging in some other illegal activity. Rachel is confused by the cop's sudden appearance and questions why he pulled over. She tries to explain that her daughter was riding on her lap during a moment of rest, but the cop continues to grill her with repeated inquiries about their destination. The officer, David, grows increasingly suspicious of Rachel's intentions and insinuates that she may be trying to incite trouble or disrupt the peace in their community. He questions if they're involved in any illegal activities and demands proof of parking tickets for a non-existent violation. Despite her attempts at explaining that her daughter was peacefully riding on the back seat during rest, David persists with his and makes it clear that he's not interested in discussing other issues, but only those involving Rachel. He uses harsh language and belittles Rachel, treating her as though she's a criminal or an enemy. Rachel feels humiliated by the cop's treatment of her and tries to defend herself through sheer forcefulness. She argues with David about their innocence and attempts to calm him down before he makes any further accusations. However, the officer remains unyielding, insisting that they're guilty as charged. As tensions escalate between them, Rachel is forced to confront a deep-seated fear of racism in her community. The cop's behavior not only reveals his own prejudice, but also serves as a stark reminder of how systemic racism still exists within our justice system. She starts to question the fairness and impartiality of their legal proceedings. David becomes increasingly obsessed with proving Rachel's innocence, resorting to illegal methods such as hacking into her daughter's social media accounts or gathering evidence against them without any actual evidence. He believes that he can use these tactics to frame Rachel as a suspect in unrelated crimes and clear his own name. Despite the risks involved, David becomes increasingly desperate to exonerate Rachel from all charges. His actions become more aggressive and violent, causing physical altercations with Rachel and others who dare to challenge him. As the situation deteriorates into a full-blown conflict between Rachel and Detective David, her daughters are witness to their mother's struggle for justice. They see firsthand how easily people can be marginalized by racist attitudes and beliefs, especially in law enforcement. One of Rachel's daughters, Emily, is particularly impacted by the events. She struggles with feelings of betrayal and anger towards the cop, who treated them unfairly. She tries to understand her mom's motivations, but remains unsure if she can trust him or his actions when it comes to matters of race and justice. The next logical beat. Rachel continues to resist David's attempts at framing her as a criminal, despite his relentless pursuit of proof against her. She feels that their relationship is more than just a case of mistaken identity, but rather an opportunity for them both to learn about each other's backgrounds and experiences. As the trial progresses, Rachel delves deeper into David's past and uncovers a dark history involving him and another woman who was wrongfully accused and convicted. This revelation serves as a painful reminder of the systemic injustice that still exists in their community. The court begins to question whether Rachel is truly innocent or if she is part of a larger, more complex web of lies and deceit. They discover evidence suggesting that David may have been involved in the original case he was investigating when he started his own investigation into her daughter's safety. This revelation casts doubt on their initial belief in Rachel's innocence and raises questions about the role they played in the events leading up to the stop at the country road. As more evidence emerges, Rachel realizes that she may have been targeted by someone with a hidden agenda. She begins to suspect that David has ulterior motives and is using her situation as an opportunity for revenge or power play. With renewed determination, Rachel works tirelessly to gather any additional information and expose the truth about her daughter's case. This includes interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence from school records, and digging into personal accounts of individuals who may have been affected by their actions. As she delves deeper, Rachel discovers a web of lies, deceit, and corruption that stretches all the way to the highest levels of government and law enforcement agencies. She realizes that her fight for justice is not just about Rachel's innocence, but also about bringing attention to these issues and holding those responsible accountable. The next logical beat. Rachel continues to work tirelessly, determined to expose the truth behind the false accusations against her daughter and bring David down for his crimes. However, she faces numerous obstacles along the way, including threats from agents within law enforcement, attempts at intimidation, and even personal attacks by people who doubt her claims. Despite these challenges, Rachel refuses to back down or compromise on her mission. She stays focused on the goal of justice and remains committed to using any means necessary to bring those responsible for this injustice to justice. As she uncovers more evidence linking David to his own criminal activities, Rachel realizes that he is not just a rogue cop, but also someone with deep roots in their community who has been manipulating events from behind the scenes. She knows that it will take a coordinated effort from everyone involved to bring about lasting change and prevent similar injustices from occurring again. In an act of solidarity, Rachel forms alliances with other activists, lawyers, and whistleblowers within law enforcement agencies who share her determination to expose the truth. They work together to gather evidence against David and build a case that can be presented in court. As the trial unfolds, Rachel stands at the forefront of this powerful movement, advocating for systemic reform and challenging the status quo. She faces numerous setbacks along the way, but she remains resolute, knowing that her fight is not just about her daughter's innocence, but also about bringing justice to all those who have been wronged by racism. The trial culminates in a dramatic confrontation between Rachel and Detective David at a public hearing where they present their evidence against him. In a tense exchange of words, Rachel exposes the truth behind his actions and questions whether he is truly innocent or if he has ulterior motives for framing her as a criminal. Despite David's initial attempt to defend himself, Rachel's evidence ultimately prevails, and he is found guilty of multiple counts of obstruction of justice. The judge sentences him to several years in prison, highlighting the severity of the crimes committed by Detective David and his accomplices. As Rachel returns home from jail, she reflects on her journey and the impact that their case has had on her community. She realizes that despite the obstacles they faced along the way, their fight for justice was not just a victory, but also a catalyst for change. It inspired others to speak out against injustice, demanding accountability in law enforcement and challenging systemic racism. With this newfound knowledge of David's past, Rachel decides to take matters into her own hands. She begins working with other activists within the community to create a nonprofit organization dedicated to addressing issues of racial justice and equality. Together, they organize protests, advocate for policy changes, and educate others about the impact of systemic racism on their communities. Asterisk, as she continues this work, Rachel remains committed to using her experience as a mother and former police officer to inspire change in her community and beyond. She knows that every step taken towards justice counts, no matter how small or difficult they may seem at first. Her legacy lives on long after her daughter's case was finally resolved, serving as a reminder of the power of standing up against injustice and working towards creating a more equitable and just society for all. Global outline. Asterisk, on a quiet country road, Rachel Carter was pulled over by a racist cop who thought he could control the story. Here's where we leave off. Rachel had been driving home from work when she received her traffic ticket. She always tried to avoid and stay focused on the road ahead, but this time something felt different about the officer in front of her. He seemed aggressive and unapproachable, his demeanor betraying a deep-seated bias against minorities. As Rachel sat there waiting for the citation process to be completed, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her every move. She turned around to look behind her, but saw no one in sight. The cop walked over to her side and announced that he had pulled her over due to an alleged violation of traffic laws. Rachel's heart sank as she realized that this might not be a random mistake, but rather part of his plan to make her feel uncomfortable or intimidated. She tried to play it cool by acknowledging the officer's authority and asking for directions on how to proceed with the citation process. The cop looked at Rachel with suspicion and wrote down the ticket number in front of her. As she handed over her driver's license, Rachel couldn't help but noticed that he was reading a racial profiling report from a local police department. It made her wonder if this officer had a personal vendetta against minorities or if his biases were ingrained in his training. Suddenly, the cop pulled out a gun and demanded to search Rachel's vehicle without a warrant. Rachel felt like she was being violated and tried to defend herself by demanding that he follow basic Fourth Amendment rights. The cop looked at her with cold eyes and replied that it wasn't up to him to decide what constituted reasonable searches. Rachel stood there, frozen in fear as the officer searched through her trunk and under seats for any evidence of illegal items or drugs. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she realized that this was not just an ordinary traffic violation, but a clear case of racial profiling and harassment. Asterisk, with each passing moment, Rachel's determination to confront the cop grew stronger. She knew that if he continued down this path, she would have no choice but to speak out against his actions and demand accountability for racism in law enforcement. As Rachel made her way through the paperwork for the citation process, she couldn't help but notice a pattern of racial profiling among local police officers. Many of them seemed more aggressive towards minority drivers or pedestrians, using biased language and making assumptions about their behavior based on factors like race and ethnicity. She decided to compile a list of these incidents and share it with her community's leaders and other activists. Together, they organized a public meeting to raise awareness about the issue of racial profiling in law enforcement and demand change from those in power. At the meeting, Rachel presented a detailed report highlighting instances where police officers have violated Fourth Amendment rights by conducting searches without warrants or following proper procedures. She also discussed the role that systemic racism plays in perpetuating these practices and the need for significant reforms to address this issue. Asterisk, as word of Rachel's actions spread through the community, more people began to speak out against racial profiling and demanding accountability from law enforcement officials. The local council organized a task force to investigate the incidents and develop policies aimed at preventing bias and promoting diversity in policing practices. The task force conducted interviews with witnesses, reviewed evidence, and interviewed police officers involved in the incidents to determine if there were any systemic issues or biases present that led to racial profiling. They also looked into alternative training methods for law enforcement officials to better understand and address cultural differences among different communities. After months of investigation and debate, a report was released by the task force containing recommendations aimed at addressing the root causes of racial profiling in policing practices. These recommendations included changes to policies and procedures, increased transparency and accountability within police departments, and training programs for law enforcement officials on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. The community erupted into cheers as they learned about the report's findings and their role in bringing about real change. Many felt that this was a significant step forward towards creating a more equitable and just society where all individuals are treated with respect and dignity, regardless of race or ethnicity. As Rachel continued her work to address racial justice and equality in her community, she remained vigilant and committed to using her experience as a former police officer to inspire change. She knew that every step taken towards SA goals counts, no matter how small or difficult they may seem at first. In the years following David's case, Rachel continued to speak out against racial profiling and advocate for policy changes in law enforcement. Her efforts paid off when she was invited by her former colleagues and other activists from around the country to participate in a summit on police reform. The event brought together top experts in criminal justice policy, community organizing, and civil rights advocacy to discuss strategies for addressing the systemic issues that contribute to racial profiling and promoting diversity in policing practices. Rachel served as an expert witness during one of the panel discussions, providing valuable insights into her experiences as a former police officer and their relevance to current efforts to reform law enforcement. The summit was a huge success, with participants coming away from the event inspired by Rachel's courage and determination to fight for justice in all aspects of society. They discussed ways to collaborate across different sectors and movements to create lasting change that benefits everyone, regardless of race or ethnicity. As Rachel looked back on her journey towards ending racial profiling in law enforcement, she knew that her daughter's case had been a catalyst for real progress. The event inspired countless others to stand up against injustice, demanding accountability from those in power and working together to create a more equitable and just society. Chunk 1. Rachel sat nervously behind the wheel of her car on a quiet country road, staring out at the unfamiliar scenery around her. She had been pulled over by a racist cop who thought he could control the story. Rachel, a seasoned police officer with years of experience in the criminal justice system, was sitting nervously behind the wheel of her car on a quiet country road. She had been pulled over by a racist cop who thought he could control the story. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor and a thick mustache, approached Rachel's window and announced his intention to question her about the traffic violation she had just committed. The tension in the air was palpable as Rachel prepared herself for what might be an uncomfortable conversation. "I'm sorry," Rachel said calmly, trying not to raise her voice or draw suspicion from the officer. "I didn't know I was breaking any rules." The cop assessed Rachel's demeanor and then launched into a detailed lecture about traffic laws and procedures. He went over every detail of the stop sign violation, emphasizing that she had ignored it by turning left without signaling when crossing the road. "I see," Rachel said, nodding slightly to show her understanding. "And do you know why I was stopped?" The cop hesitated for a moment before responding. We received an anonymous tip about your potential involvement in a recent drug bust, he replied. Based on our investigation, we've determined that there may have been some suspicious activity taking place near the location of the traffic stop. Rachel's heart raced as she listened to the officer's explanation. She knew what this could mean. Her daughter was under arrest for possession of drugs and facing potential consequences if convicted. I'm not a suspect, Rachel said firmly, trying to maintain her composure. My daughter is innocent, and we have every right to defend her. The cop seemed skeptical at first, but as he continued to probe deeper into the case, his tone softened slightly. He explained that they had obtained additional information about the drugs they suspected were being transported by Rachel's vehicle. The evidence was strong enough for them to make an arrest. Rachel felt a sense of relief wash over her as she realized that justice was finally beginning to be served in their daughter's case. She knew that this wasn't just a matter of law and order, but something much larger than that. It was about ensuring that all individuals were treated with dignity and respect regardless of race or ethnicity. As the cop led Rachel out of his car for questioning, she couldn't help but reflect on her own journey towards ending racial profiling in law enforcement. She had always been passionate about policing and fighting against injustice, but she never thought it would be possible to make a difference until this moment. The summit that took place at the police station was an incredible turning point in her career. It brought together leaders from different sectors and movements across the country, all focused on creating lasting change that benefited everyone. Rachel had seen firsthand how racism could undermine trust between law enforcement officers and communities they served, making it difficult for them to effectively carry out their duties. But with the help of her daughter's case, she knew that there was a growing movement towards reforming law enforcement practices and promoting racial equity in policing. The summit had inspired countless others to stand up against injustice and demand accountability from those in power, working together to create a more inclusive and just society. As Rachel sat in her car outside the police station, feeling overwhelmed by the progress she had made in ending racial profiling in law enforcement, she couldn't help but feel grateful for everything that lay ahead. She knew that it would take time and effort to make lasting change, but she was confident that with every step forward, they were closer towards creating a world where justice served all people regardless of their race or ethnicity. The road had been long and difficult, but the progress made in ending racial profiling has shown her that anything is possible when you believe in something bigger than yourself. Rachel looked ahead to what the future held for her daughter's case and knew that she was ready to fight with every ounce of strength she could muster, because justice wasn't just a matter of law and order, it was also about creating a better world for everyone. On a quiet country road, Rachel Carter was pulled over by a racist cop who thought he could control the story. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to suppress the anger that threatened to rise inside her. She had been driving home from work when she noticed something odd about the officer's demeanor. He seemed uninterested in checking her license plate, instead scanning his weapon and glancing back at Rachel with a sneer on his face. As he approached her window, he made clear that he was not here to traffic stop or investigate any minor violation. Rachel tried to keep calm, but knew she had been caught red-handed for the last time. She took a deep breath and slowly pulled out her wallet to hand over her driver's license. The cop's eyes scanned the documents, his expression growing cold as he began to question her about her identity. Rachel was feeling overwhelmed by the injustice that surrounded her. "I'm not here for a speeding ticket," she said firmly, trying to remain composed despite the fear building inside her. "I work at a local hospital, and I recently took some time off to volunteer with your department." The cop's eyes narrowed as he studied Rachel's face, his expression turning into one of suspicion. He leaned in closer, his breath hot on her neck. "You're not volunteering for us," he said, his voice low but menacing. Rachel tried to shake the feeling that something was off about him, sensing a danger lurking behind those cold blue eyes. She knew she couldn't afford to let her guard down and had to act fast if she wanted to protect herself from any further harm. "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, trying to sound calm, but still determined not to give in to his threats. The cop hesitated for a moment before finally answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know who we're looking for," he said, gesturing towards the driver's seat. "A black woman named Sarah Isaiah Harris." Rachel's heart sank as she realized that her daughter was being targeted by this racist officer because of her race. She had always known that there were some prejudices and biases within law enforcement, but to hear his name spoken so openly felt like a violation. "You're mistaken," Rachel said, trying to maintain composure despite the fear in her voice. "Sarah Isaiah Harris is not a black woman." The cop's eyes narrowed even further as he studied her expression, his tone becoming increasingly hostile. "You don't know who Sarah Isaiah Harris is? How do you think she fits into our department?" Rachel knew that this was where things started to get real. She had never worked with any other police officers before and didn't have a clue about the kind of people they encountered on a daily basis. "I'm sorry, but I can assure you," Rachel said firmly, her voice growing louder as she stood up from her seat. "Sarah Isaiah Harris is not your department's jurisdiction." The cop narrowed his eyes at Rachel once again, his expression showing that he was unimpressed by her efforts to defend her daughter's rights. He leaned forward and grabbed a nearby file folder, pulling it out with shaking hands. "We have evidence linking Sarah Isaiah Harris to several criminal offenses," he said, gesturing towards the documents on the desk. "We need you to cooperate with us and provide information about your involvement in those cases." Rachel felt her stomach drop as she realized that this was not a simple traffic stop or a misunderstanding. She had no idea who Sarah Isaiah Harris was or what crime she might have been involved in, but she knew one thing for sure. The man at the wheel of her car was not authorized to make any accusations against anyone without proper evidence. "I'm willing to cooperate," Rachel said finally, standing up from her seat and straightening her dress. "But I need a lawyer." The cop's eyes narrowed even further as he studied her expression, his tone becoming more hostile again. He leaned forward and grabbed another file folder, pulling it out with shaking hands. "We have already contacted your attorney," the cop said, gesturing towards Rachel's phone on the desk. "He will be here in a few minutes to discuss the case." Rachel felt like she was being trapped by this man at the wheel of her car, and there was no way out except for fighting him tooth and nail. She knew that it would take all her strength and resources to stand up against his racist tactics and protect Sarah Isaiah Harris's right to justice. "I'll handle the situation," Rachel said confidently, standing back from the desk and reaching into her purse for a phone call. "I'm going straight to my attorney." The cop hesitated briefly before nodding in agreement, giving Rachel one last chance to convince him that she was not a threat. He leaned forward once more, but seemed less interested this time. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's see what you have on you." Rachel pocketed her phone and walked towards the front door of the police station, determined to make a stand against racism and demand accountability from those in power. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Rachel knew that with each step forward, they were getting closer to creating a world where justice served all people regardless of their race or ethnicity. She had fought hard for her daughter's rights, and she was not going to let anyone stand in the way of making those dreams come true. The 1. Rachel Carter. 2. Rachel. Rachel. 3, 4 Rachel. 5. O Rachel. 6 Rachel. 7. O Rachel. Rachel. 8. Rachel Rachel. Rachel. 9. Rachel Rachel. 10 Rachel. Rachel 1. Rachel. 2. Rachel. 3. Rachel. Rachel. 11. Rachel. 12. Rachel. 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 In the quiet country road, Rachel Carter was on a mission to fight against racism and demand accountability from those in power. The sun was setting as she pulled over her car to check her license plate number at the police station's front desk. She had been driving for hours, trying to evade the racist cop who thought he could control the story. As she approached the building, a tall officer stepped out with an angry expression on his face. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, scanning her license plate and checking her ID card. "I'm just doing my job," Rachel replied, holding up her evidence folder. "I've been pulled over for speeding and reckless driving, but I want to clear myself of any wrongdoing." The officer's eyes narrowed in surprise at the sight of Rachel's file. "Speeding? That seems like a serious charge, especially on this quiet road where there are no other cars nearby," he said. "I know," Rachel replied firmly, "but you can't just arrest me for speeding based on that one incident alone. I've done my best to obey the rules of the road and have been driving safely all day." The officer hesitated for a moment before nodding in understanding. He glanced over at his colleague, who was standing nearby with a clipboard and a pen in hand. "All right," he said finally, pocketing his phone again. "Let's take a look at your car. Do you have any witnesses to the incident?" Rachel nodded, eager to prove her innocence. She walked up to the police station's parking lot, where she parked her car behind the cop cars and started walking towards the building. As Rachel made her way through the door, she could see other officers milling about, their eyes scanning every inch of the office for any signs of potential trouble. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone tried to maintain a level of professionalism while also keeping an eye out for any rogue agents or informants lurking among the shadows. Rachel took note of her surroundings and mentally mapped out each possible scenario that could lead up to this moment. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she refused to let anyone stand in the way of her mission. As she walked towards a conference room, Rachel noticed a young officer sitting at his desk, typing on a computer while another officer stood by his side with their arms folded across their chest. "Hey there," she said, approaching him with a smile on her face. The officer looked up from his screen and raised an eyebrow in surprise before nodding to indicate that he recognized her. "Rachel Carter," he said, smiling warmly. "Detective Jameson?" Rachel asked, feeling a surge of excitement at the mention of one of her former co-workers who had worked for the same department as she did. She had often caught up with him over lunch and admired his dedication to justice. "Yeah, Detective Jameson," he replied, shaking hands gently before turning back to his computer screen. "How are you doing today?" Rachel smiled widely at Jameson's friendly demeanor. "I'm good," she said, feeling a sense of determination wash over her as she took in the scene unfolding around her. She knew that this was just the beginning of their journey towards finding answers and bringing those responsible for the racist incident to justice. As Rachel walked through the conference room, Jameson leaned forward to speak with her directly. "So," he said, his voice low and serious, "have you gathered any information on the cause of your traffic stop?" Rachel hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Well, I understand that it was an accident, but there were definitely some signs of premeditation involved." She glanced over at Jameson's colleague who had been sitting nearby, nodding in agreement. "Did you see anything that contradicted this explanation?" he asked, his tone grave as he listened to Rachel's words. "For example, did you notice any suspicious behavior from the driver prior to the stop?" Rachel nodded eagerly, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that Jameson would need more evidence before drawing a conclusion about the incident and its possible cause. "We'll have to run some background checks on the driver," he said, scanning his notes across his desk. "We may also want to speak with witnesses who were present at the scene." Rachel felt her heart pounding in her chest as she realized that this was just the beginning of a complex investigation that would take months or even years to complete. But for now, all she could do was stay focused on one goal: finding justice for those who had been wronged by these racist officers and bringing them to account. "I'll be sure to provide you with everything I can," Rachel said, turning back to Jameson before walking out of the conference room into a bustling hallway. "Thank you for your time today, Detective." Jameson nodded in recognition as she turned off his phone. He knew that this would be just one step on Rachel's journey towards bringing down racism and promoting justice in their community. As Rachel stepped out onto the busy street, her thoughts were still focused on the task at hand. She couldn't wait to see what other challenges lay ahead of her and how she could continue to fight for a fairer world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. Int. Rachel's apartment. Day. Rachel sits at her desk, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of her. The room is dimly lit, with only a single light bulb casting an eerie glow over her face as she types away at her laptop. She's surrounded by stacks of files and papers, each one containing details about the recent racist incident that had taken place on a quiet country road. Rachel knows it won't be easy to uncover the truth behind this case, but she's determined to see justice done for those who were wronged. As she flips through her notes, she starts to piece together the events leading up to the encounter with Detective Jameson. It all started when Rachel was driving along a quiet country road in rural Virginia on a Friday afternoon. She had just returned from work and was heading home, after an exhausting day at her job as a software engineer. As she neared a small town, she noticed that one of her fellow drivers seemed to be nervous. They stopped the car abruptly, gesturing for Rachel to pull over. Rachel pulled up behind them, parking on the side of the road with caution. She looked back and saw a young black man standing next to his white counterpart, both holding their hands together in front of them. The man had a stern look on his face and seemed to be sizing her down. "Excuse me," Rachel said, trying not to appear confrontational as she approached the two men. "What was that about?" The younger black man stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Rachel. "We were just passing by a white driver who had pulled over for a minor violation." Rachel felt her heart race in her chest at this revelation. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. An incident of racial profiling where one police officer thought they could control the story. As she listened to their account, Rachel began to piece together the events leading up to the encounter. They had both been working on a project that required them to drive through the same rural area, and while Rachel's car was not marked as a patrol vehicle in her area, it did have black paint markings, which set off a red flag for local law enforcement. Rachel knew she needed to take action before things got any worse. She quickly called Detective Jameson, who arrived at the scene on his motorcycle within minutes. They both rushed over to the two men and questioned them about their encounter, hoping to get some clues that would help solve the case. As they spoke, Rachel watched as Jameson took notes on the details of the incident. He noticed that the younger black man had been wearing a white hoodie with the word "whiteness" written across it. The older black man, on the other hand, was dressed in a dark-colored jacket and jeans. Jameson asked if they could describe their vehicles to him, but both men refused. They told him about their car's location, which was not within Rachel's jurisdiction as she worked for a tech company based in nearby Washington, D.C. Rachel knew that these details would be crucial in identifying the vehicle involved in the incident and gathering evidence against it. She quickly gathered some more information from her colleagues at work who had been working on similar projects to determine if any of their vehicles were marked with similar paint or other markings that could help identify the suspect. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel's efforts paid off when she finally got a lead on the vehicle involved in the incident. It was a blue Ford Explorer driven by a white male driver who had been spotted near the same location where the two black men were stopped. Rachel quickly called the police department in Virginia and arranged for them to conduct an investigation into the vehicle's registration number. As they followed the leads, Rachel began to piece together the story of what had happened that day. The blue Ford Explorer was owned by a wealthy white businessman named Isaiah Harris, who lived in his sprawling mansion just outside the small town where the incident occurred. According to witnesses, Mr. Isaiah Harris was at home when he noticed one of his employees driving down a dirt road and pulled over for a minor violation. When they approached the car, they were met with an aggressive response from Isaiah Harris himself. He ordered them to step out of their vehicles and arrested both men for violating traffic laws. However, as Rachel investigated further, she discovered that Mr. Isaiah Harris had never owned or operated any vehicle in his area, let alone a blue Ford Explorer. She quickly reached out to the Virginia State Police for assistance and learned that there was no evidence linking Isaiah Harris to the incident on the country road. The police department determined that the two black men were simply passing through the area and didn't have any connection to Mr. Isaiah Harris or his business dealings in their town. Rachel knew that this would be a significant setback, as it meant that she might need to pursue other leads or work with local law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C. to gather more information about Isaiah Harris's identity and possible associates related to the incident. But despite these obstacles, Rachel remained determined. She continued to investigate, gathering evidence from witnesses who had seen Mr. Isaiah Harris driving his white Explorer during the time of the incident. They included a black woman who was walking along the road with her dog when she noticed something out of place in the car's window. The witness described how Isaiah Harris seemed to be staring directly at Rachel and then back down at their dog, as if he knew they were there. She also mentioned that Mr. Isaiah Harris had been wearing his distinctive white hoodie during this time, which was a clear sign of racial profiling. Rachel took these details into account and began piecing together the story of what might have led Isaiah Harris to be so aggressive towards the two black men. It appeared that he may have seen them as potential threats or competitors in his business dealings with their local community. As Rachel continued her investigation, she discovered that Mr. Isaiah Harris had been involved in several other incidents where he had targeted people based on their skin color or race. He was known to use racial slurs and make derogatory comments towards black individuals, particularly those from the surrounding town. Rachel knew that if left unchecked, this behavior would only escalate into a wider problem of systemic racism in their community. She reached out to local leaders and community organizations for support, urging them to take action against Mr. Isaiah Harris's actions and raise awareness about the importance of treating all members of society with respect and dignity. The response was overwhelming, as many residents came together to demand justice for the two black men who had been wronged by Isaiah Harris's racist tactics. Rachel knew that this would be a long road ahead, but she remained committed to her mission and inspired by the courage of those who were fighting against racism in their community. In the end, Rachel was able to gather enough evidence to bring down Isaiah Harris and his business practices to justice. The local police department arrested him on charges of racial profiling and discrimination, and he was taken into custody for further investigation. As Rachel sat back at her desk, reflecting on all that had happened over the past few weeks, she knew that it would take more time and effort than expected to fully resolve this case. But she also felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that justice had been served and that her work as a detective was making a difference in their community. For Rachel, this incident represented not just an injustice suffered by two individuals, but the larger problem of systemic racism that exists in our society. She knew that there would always be more to uncover and investigate, but she also felt empowered to take action against those who perpetuate such discrimination and work towards creating a fairer world for all. As Rachel continued her journey as a detective, she vowed to never let fear or prejudice hold her back from pursuing justice in the face of injustice. She knew that every challenge would present new opportunities for growth and change, but also presented an opportunity to fight against the forces of darkness and work towards building a brighter future for all. /I'm_stop. On a quiet country road, Rachel Carter was driving home from work when she pulled over to the side of the road. She had been feeling stressed and overwhelmed lately due to her investigation into a recent hate crime incident that targeted an African-American man who was attacked by two white supremacists in his hometown. As she stood there waiting for the police officer to pull her car over, Rachel couldn't help but feel the weight of what she had just witnessed. The scene before her was stark and disturbing. A black man lying on the ground with cuts and bruises all over his body, clearly indicating that he had been beaten by these racists. As the officers arrived, they arrested both suspects for their actions, but Rachel couldn't shake off the feeling of unease she felt about what had just occurred. As her investigation progressed, Rachel discovered a complex web of conspiracy theories surrounding the incident and the motivations behind it. She uncovered evidence that suggested not only racial bias, but also broader societal issues such as classism, economic inequality, and political polarization. This led her to question how these factors could have played a role in the attack on this particular man. Rachel's investigation took her deep into the community where she met with residents who had been affected by the incident. They shared their stories of fear, trauma, and hopelessness, highlighting the urgent need for action against systemic racism and promoting social justice. Rachel also spoke to local politicians and community leaders, urging them to take bold steps towards addressing these issues and creating a more inclusive society. One of the key players in this investigation was a young woman named Emma, who had grown up in the same neighborhood where the attack occurred, but never felt safe enough to express her identity or voice out against racism. Rachel recognized that Emma's fear and isolation were not uncommon among marginalized communities, and she knew that something needed to be done to address these issues. As Rachel continued her investigation, she discovered a series of covert meetings between white supremacists and individuals who sought to promote their beliefs and ideologies. These meetings took place in secret locations and often involved the use of false identities or stolen information to gain access to sensitive areas. Through her detective work, Rachel uncovered evidence that these groups were using hate speech and violence as a way to spread their message and recruit new members. Rachel knew that she had to take action against this network if she wanted to bring justice to the victim and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. She organized a series of protests and rallies in support of racial equality, bringing together people from different communities and backgrounds to express their anger and demand change. Despite facing resistance and threats from some segments of society who opposed these movements, Rachel remained committed to her cause. She knew that it was not just about the victims, but also about creating awareness, inspiring others, and building a safer and more inclusive world for all. As she continued on her journey as a detective, Rachel felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment in knowing that she had made a difference. The incident at first seemed like an isolated act of hate, but as Rachel's investigation progressed, she began to see the systemic nature of racism in our society. She uncovered evidence of police brutality, housing discrimination, and economic inequality, all of which were interconnected with racial bias and violence. She realized that these issues required a collective effort from individuals, communities, and government agencies alike. Rachel knew that change was not going to happen overnight, but she also felt confident that by working together and taking bold action, they could make significant progress towards creating a more just and equitable society for all. She continued her investigation with renewed determination, using the lessons learned in previous cases to develop new strategies and tactics to combat racism and promote social justice. In the end, Rachel's investigation not only led to the arrest of the two suspects, but also sparked a broader conversation about systemic racism and its impact on our communities. Her bravery and dedication inspired others to join her fight against injustice, creating an even more unified and resilient community that was dedicated to promoting equality and fighting for what is right. The incident at the country road had not only left Rachel shaken by the brutality of hatred, but also transformed into a symbol of hope and perseverance in the face of adversity. As she continued on her journey as a detective, Rachel knew that justice would never truly be served until we confronted these issues head-on and worked towards creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity, respect, and equality for all. On a quiet country road, Rachel Carter was pulled over by a racist cop who thought he could control the story. As she approached him at the red light, her heart raced with anxiety as she prepared for what lay ahead. The officer's eyes scanned her every inch of her body, his finger pointing impatiently towards her dashboard. "Get out of here," he growled in her ear, brandishing a gun that glinted menacingly in the dim streetlights. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins as she tried to maintain composure and remain calm under such intense scrutiny. Despite his intimidating presence, Rachel knew she had no choice but to comply with the officer's demands. She slowly put on her seat belt and stepped out of the car, hand over the police report and paperwork that accompanied it. As she approached the officer, he looked at her warily, sizing up her every movement before finally issuing his arrest. As Rachel sat in jail awaiting trial, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. For too long, the injustices faced by minorities had been dismissed as mere incidents or accidents. But now, thanks to this one brave act of resistance from an unlikely hero like Rachel Carter, they were beginning to take notice and demanding change. Over the next few months, Rachel's investigation took a new turn when she discovered that not only was there evidence linking the two suspects to the hate crime on the country road, but also that there had been prior instances of racist behavior and harassment towards minorities in her community. As Rachel delved deeper into these investigations, she uncovered a network of systemic racism that went far beyond individual acts of discrimination. The first step for Rachel and her team was to identify and document the sources of this discriminatory system. They reviewed records from local schools, businesses, and government agencies to understand how biases and prejudices were ingrained in our society through policies, training, and leadership. The findings revealed a clear pattern. White people held more power and influence than their minority counterparts, resulting in unequal access to opportunities, resources, and representation. Next, Rachel worked tirelessly to promote awareness about these systemic issues within the community. She organized workshops and conferences that brought together local leaders, activists, and influencers who shared their personal stories of discrimination and injustice. These events not only educated the public, but also inspired a sense of urgency and momentum towards creating a more just society for all. Rachel's efforts caught the attention of the media, which began to highlight her work in mainstream news outlets and social media platforms. The coverage highlighted the critical role that everyday people like Rachel could play in addressing this issue and raising awareness about systemic racism. As public opinion shifted towards supporting her cause, She received numerous letters and messages from individuals who were inspired by her bravery and dedication. The tide began to turn for change as more communities across the country took notice of Rachel's efforts and joined forces with her in their own battles against racial injustice. Schools started implementing anti-racist policies that included diversity training and implicit bias assessments. Businesses made hiring decisions based on qualifications rather than skin color or ethnicity, and government agencies invested resources into addressing systemic issues. In addition to these policy changes, community organizations formed to provide support for individuals who had been victims of discrimination or had faced microaggressions. Rachel's team worked closely with these groups to develop programs that addressed the root causes of racism and provided resources for healing and resilience building. These initiatives not only helped prevent future incidents, but also served as a space where marginalized communities could connect, share their stories, and learn from one another. As Rachel continued her work in the community, she received countless messages of gratitude and admiration from people who had been touched by her courage and determination. They recognized that they too could play an important role in creating change and work together to build a more inclusive and equitable society for all. The events at the Country Road were not just about bringing justice, but also about laying the foundation for lasting change. Rachel's bravery had sparked a movement within communities across the nation, inspiring others to stand up against racism and work towards a world where everyone is treated with dignity, respect, and equality for all. She knew that her journey was far from over, as systemic issues remained deeply ingrained in our society and needed ongoing efforts to address. But through it all, Rachel's unwavering spirit of resilience and determination continued to drive the momentum forward. She refused to be intimidated by the challenges she faced or discouraged by setbacks along the way. Instead, she used each setback as an opportunity to learn, grow, and become a better detective, always striving to improve her skills and approach in order to tackle even more complex cases. As Rachel sat in jail awaiting trial once again, reflecting on all that had happened over the past few months, she knew that justice would never truly be served until we confronted these issues head-on and worked towards creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity, respect, and equality for all. And as she looked out at the community around her, Rachel couldn't help but feel grateful to have been part of this incredible journey, one in which ordinary people like herself had taken the lead in challenging systemic racism and working towards building a more just society for all. Jail cell. Day. Rachel Carter sat huddled in her cell, staring out the small window at the bleak landscape outside. The sun had just set, and the sky was a deep shade of orange, casting an eerie glow over the rows of cells that surrounded her. She was locked up again, serving another sentence for her involvement with the racist cop who had pulled her over earlier. As she sat there, Rachel couldn't help but feel frustrated and angry at herself for getting involved in this situation in the first place. How could she have let someone like that get away with targeting a young black woman like herself? She knew it was wrong of her to trust anyone so easily, especially when they were clearly acting out of malice. But as much as Rachel tried not to dwell on these thoughts, their presence still haunted her every day. The racist cop who had pulled over her had been intimidating and aggressive throughout the entire ordeal, making sure she knew that he was in control of the situation. And even though it had eventually escalated into a physical confrontation, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't quite feel right. But despite her anger and frustration, Rachel refused to let these thoughts consume her completely. Instead, she took a deep breath and focused on finding solutions to the problems at hand. She knew that there were many challenges ahead of her, from dealing with legal issues to building relationships with other inmates who could offer support and advice. One day, as Rachel sat in her cell, she came across an old letter written by one of the racist cops she had been accused of stealing money from. In it, he expressed his regret for any harm he may have caused her and offered a sincere apology if she was willing to take him up on his offer. Rachel hesitated at first, unsure whether or not this cop actually meant what he said. But as she read through the letter more closely, something sparked within her. She realized that despite his initial actions, the man had shown genuine remorse for his behavior and even expressed a willingness to work towards making things right. With newfound hope in her heart, Rachel decided to reach out to this cop and see if he was willing to help her in any way. She reached him by phone, explaining how she had been accused of theft, but that it wasn't the same as stealing money from someone else's property. The cop listened intently, nodding his head in understanding. Over the next few weeks, Rachel worked tirelessly with this cop to gather evidence against the racist cop and present her case before a judge. She used every piece of information she had gathered to build a strong case that not only proved the officer's guilt, but also showed the severity of their actions. As the trial approached, Rachel couldn't help but feel nervous about how it would be received by both the court and the community. But despite her fear, she remained confident in herself and her ability to present a clear and compelling argument. On the day of the trial, Rachel was brought into the courtroom dressed in her usual prison uniform, looking nerves-racked as she took her seat at the defense table. She prepared for what lay ahead, knowing that this would be one of the most significant moments of her life so far. The judge stood up and began reading his instructions to both parties involved. Rachel's heart was pounding with anticipation as he outlined the charges against the racist cop, stating that he had committed theft by receiving stolen money from an innocent person while on duty as a police officer. At first, the other inmates in the room seemed shocked and overwhelmed at what they were hearing. But then, to their surprise, the racist cop himself stepped forward and began confessing his guilt. He explained how he had been acting out of racial bias and had taken advantage of an innocent person's trust and confidence, causing her financial distress. Rachel felt a wave of relief wash over her as she watched this man confess before the judge and his fellow inmates. It was clear that justice had finally come for Rachel, who had been unjustly accused and held accountable by those in power. As the judge read out the verdict against the racist cop, Rachel could hardly believe what had just happened. She felt a mix of emotions, anger at her own actions, but also relief that she had made the right decision to seek justice on behalf of an innocent person. The court erupted into cheers as the other inmates and supporters alike celebrated the successful outcome of the trial. Rachel couldn't help but feel grateful for this incredible journey, one in which ordinary people like herself had taken a stand against systemic racism and worked towards building a more just society for all. With renewed confidence in her own abilities, Rachel returned to jail, where she began working tirelessly on new cases that would challenge even the most powerful systems of oppression. She knew that justice was not an easy road, but with each step forward, she was making progress towards creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect for all. As Rachel sat in her cell once again, looking out at the bleak landscape outside, she couldn't help but feel grateful for this incredible journey and the countless moments of inspiration that had led her on. And as she looked into the future, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always be ready to stand up against injustice and fight for a better world. /I'm_INT. Jail cell. Day. The sun is setting outside the small cell block, casting a warm glow over Rachel's face as she sits alone in her dimly lit cells. The walls are lined with concrete and steel bars, their harsh edges piercing through the thin air. She looks up at the ceiling, staring out at the endless expanse of blue sky above her. Rachel feels a mix of emotions wash over her: fear, determination, anger, and hope, all vying for dominance in her mind. For months now, she has been fighting against racism both inside and outside the jail system. She had been arrested on charges of attempted murder when a racist cop pulled her over on a quiet country road. The judge handed down a harsh sentence: life imprisonment without parole, but Rachel refused to accept it. She knew that this was just one case in a larger systemic struggle for justice, where people are systematically oppressed and silenced because of their race or ethnicity. But she refused to give up hope, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. She had been working tirelessly on new cases from the moment the trial began, investigating patterns of discrimination and advocating for change. As Rachel sat in her cell once again, a sense of determination washed over her. "I won't let this stop me," she thought to herself. "I will continue fighting until justice is served." Suddenly, a voice booms out behind her. "Rachel Carter, you're going back into jail today." The noise startled Rachel and made her jump from the seat in front of her. She looked around the cell, searching for anyone who might have broken her concentration. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. A guard walked up behind her, his eyes fixed on her. "We're going back into custody," he replied matter-of-factly. Rachel felt a surge of anger and frustration. She had been working so hard for months, fighting against the system in court, but now it seemed like all those efforts were paying off at last. The guard led Rachel out of the cell and down the long hallway to the main prison facility. As they walked through the dimly lit cells, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of unease about what was going on behind her back. "We're being transferred," he said, his voice low and urgent. Rachel looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" The guard hesitated for a moment before answering. "We are being taken to another prison where we'll be held indefinitely until our cases can be concluded." Rachel's heart sank as she realized that her fight might not be over yet. She had been working on some very powerful and complex cases, ones that could challenge even the most oppressive systems of oppression in society. "I won't let them get away with this," Rachel said, determination flooding through her veins. The guard nodded agreement, his voice heavy with worry as he led Rachel to a small cell block where they would be held for the next few days. As she sat there in silence, Rachel couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened, and the fact that this was not just about her case. But then it dawned on her. This wasn't just a personal struggle against racism. It was a fight for justice as a whole. She knew that she needed to remain focused, to stay committed to her cause, no matter how difficult things might get. As Rachel sat in the dimly lit cells, looking out at the bleak landscape outside once again, she felt a sense of gratitude wash over her, one for all those who had been fighting against injustice and working towards creating a more just society. And as she looked into the future, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always be ready to stand up against injustice and fight for a better world. /I'm_INT. Police station. Day. Rachel Carter stood nervously in front of the booking clerk, her heart pounding as she waited for her court date to be called. She had been a victim of racial profiling and discrimination throughout her life, but tonight's encounter with the racist cop on the quiet country road was one that would change everything. The officer sat across from Rachel, his eyes fixed on her as he read over her paperwork and explained the charges against her for driving under the influence, DUI, and reckless endangerment. As Rachel listened to him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her, not because of the fact that she was being convicted, but rather because she knew now that justice had been served. But as the clerk marked down her name for trial, something unexpected happened. The officer's eyes widened in recognition, and he turned to Rachel with an intense expression on his face. "Rachel," he said, "I have some news." Rachel's heart skipped a beat at first, but then she realized that there was more going on than just the charges against her. She had been following a trail of evidence that suggested that someone else may be responsible for her recent arrest and the subsequent violence that occurred in her neighborhood. As Rachel sat there in silence, trying to process what was happening around her, a voice spoke up behind her. It came from an unknown source, but it filled her with hope and determination. "Rachel," the voice said softly, "I know you're innocent by default because of the evidence we've gathered. But I also believe that justice is not just about punishing those responsible for your actions." Rachel's eyes widened in shock as she realized what the officer had been hinting at. She turned to him and asked, "What are you talking about?" The officer hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice low but steady. "We've discovered that there may be another individual involved in this situation who is responsible for your arrest and the violence that occurred on your block." Rachel's heart raced as she listened to what the cop was saying. She knew that they were talking about her neighbor, a man named Mark, who had been caught by Rachel's car earlier that day during an argument over parking. Mark was not just a criminal. He was a victim himself. He had been attacked and beaten in his own home while trying to defend himself from Rachel's attack on the night of her arrest. And now, with evidence pointing towards him as being responsible for the violence, the police were investigating whether he may have helped Rachel commit her crime. Rachel knew that this would be a difficult road ahead, not only because Mark had been physically attacked, but also because she didn't know how to defend herself against his accusations without incriminating her. She could feel tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as she listened to what the cop was saying and wondered if they were right. But then something unexpected happened. The police officer's voice took on a deep, resonant tone that echoed through the room. "Rachel," he said softly, "you have nothing to fear. We are here for you." As Rachel looked up at him with gratitude in her eyes, she knew that this was not just about Mark or his case. It was about justice and equality for all. She felt a sense of hope wash over her as the police officer continued their investigation into whether Mark had helped Rachel commit the crime. In the end, the evidence against Rachel turned out to be overwhelming, leading to a guilty verdict in her court trial. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison for driving under the influence and reckless endangerment, but she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey towards justice. As she sat there in silence before the door to her cell block closed behind her, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been fighting against injustice for years, working tirelessly to raise awareness about racism and discrimination, and now she knew that her fight was not just against Mark or his case. It was against all those who were being unjustly targeted in our society. As she looked out at the bleak landscape outside once again, Rachel felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She knew that justice would always be served, no matter how difficult things might get along the way. And as she prepared to go back to prison and start anew, she knew that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. For in this fight against injustice, she had found not just a sense of purpose, but also a community of people who were fighting alongside her, working towards creating a more just world for all.